This is always the tricky thing is to share my screen. Oh, Brittany, you've got to make me a co-host so I can share my screen for the slides.
Just did it.
Thank you. Okay, start broadcast. All right, tell me when I'm broadcasting.
Got it.
Is it showing? It's got it? Okay. Let me get up here to the top. Oops, hold on. All right, let's start this over again because it seems to be hanging up. There we go. There we go.
Call me if you find anything.
There we go. There's always. There we go. All right. So this all started because my house was built in 1904, and I was thinking about what life was like for the people who lived here when my house was new. So so many things are, there's a lot of stuff about architecture, there's a lot of, but just really sort of what people were going and doing at the time. I started doing a little research. So I thought that other people might enjoy what I found. So this is it's an interesting time because 1900 Denver was just starting to recover. The silver crash in 1893 had along with some other things going on at the time, but it had particularly hit Colorado with all the mining here, and the western states were very, very badly hit. But you can't take out part of an economy without it tumbling across. So it started a major depression. In fact, this was called the Great Depression until what we know as the Great Depression came along and took that name from it. But I mean, it was an honest to goodness depression in that from 1893 to 1900. There were 45,000 Coloradans out of work. Banks were closing. The Union Pacific Railroad filed for bankruptcy. Almost 400 businesses in Denver closed. It was more than 9,500 jobs dried up in the mining towns across the state. It was a free-falling economy. And this was on top of there had been, this was the silver crash when they switched to the gold standard, and it was disastrous. But on top of that, we had a few years of really bad winters and drought. So the crops had not been good. So this was when we started into 1900. Denver had spent 10 years going through a really rough time. This little news clipping to the left, it's from Fort Collins, and I just thought it was interesting little tidbits. It's from August of 1893. Talking about how Denver is trying to give employment to destitute men who were coming in, and how they were trying to, Denver has done and doing nobly and caring for distressed. At the bottom of the list, it says the daily list of bank suspensions is growing smaller, but the list of business failures is getting longer day by day. And this was at the very start of things. In over that decade, Denver lost more than 1/10 of its population. They hit the road trying to find jobs because there was just no work. So as we come into 1900, things are starting to settle out. And it's, employment starting to come back. During the depression of the 1890s, national unemployment had been between 12 and 18%. And finally, in 1900, it dropped back into single digits. So people could feel life returning to some sort of normal. And so this is what's going on through that decade. Things like the St. Louis World's Fair, 1904. It was officially known as the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, because it was celebrating the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase from 1804. It opened in April. It ran 8 months through just into the start of December. And it's estimated that over 20 million visitors came to the 1904 World's Fair.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the song, "Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis." And so there were that in the middle there was a lake, there had boats, there was a fairgrounds with Ferris wheel, there was gardens, there was most of the buildings here were designed to be temporary. So they were made out of, it was wood. They look elegant, but there were wood frame and plaster of Paris. But there were a few things that still stood. At the end of it, the St. Louis Zoo was developed around what was the open flight bird cage. So this was one of the big stories of the decade. Another, oh, I forgot about this. This is a special thing that this decade was considered the golden age of postcards. So yeah, so in the early 1900s, publishers came up with lots of ways to make postcards unique and novel. And one of these was the hold it up to the light postcard. So the idea is that you get the image on the front, which is the one on the right. And this is my postcard. The image on the right is what it looks like when just normal. And then on the left is when I held it up against the window, so it had light coming in. So all the windows light up, and the street lights light up, and the fountain lights up. And it was, it's made they die cut out the pictures, so you get a double layer of postcard. And I just thought that was particularly neat. And that's from the St. Louis World's Fair.
I'm sorry, I didn't it was you stayed late. Intimate relations.
Another unfortunate big story of that decade was the San Francisco earthquake. Now this is the article to the right here is from let's see, I think that was a Colorado Springs newspaper. But one of the ways so there were a lot of refugees, people who had been in San Francisco for business, people who lived there but had relatives they could flee to. They came, like the Denver and Rio Grande and other trains, they were transporting people away from the earthquake for free. And so a lot of the trains, of course, being we were on the major route going through, came through Colorado, and people all over Colorado would come out and meet the train and bring the people food, and give them a place to wash up, give them a place to refresh before they sent them on their way back to the East Coast to their homes or to family to stay with. It was in April of 1806, of April 18th of 1906, it was a magnitude 7.8, and it was centered in San Francisco. So it's no wonder that this happened. It was nearly 500 city blocks were leveled. They figured there's more than 25,000 buildings destroyed. 250,000 people were left homeless. That's more than half the population of the city at the time. They don't know how many died. They figure it was more than 3,000. The fires that started because of the broken gas lines burned for 3 full days. Now I'm going to show you guys I'm going to go over to my internet. This interesting video this video was taken in the week before the earthquake hit. And so these people added in sound to just make it feel a little more present. Goes on for almost 12 minutes, but I will pull through a little bit here, pull a little forward. But you see there's cars, there's horse-drawn carriages, people running across the street. I don't see one at the moment, but there's bicycles that zip in and out of traffic. People just wander across the street. And this is San Francisco, but this is very much like what Denver would have looked like. We had the trolleys, we had the early cars, we had horse-drawn vehicles, we had people commuting around the city on bicycles. I just thought this was a fascinating thing to see. Pull up a little further, because this is less than a week. That's the ferry building that occasionally you can see in the very distance, and this is within. And
a fun little hint on that. The only reason why it survived was this video needed to be shipped off to I think it was the newspaper editors. And so they had shipped it, I think, to the New York office before the earthquake hit.
The day. Yes. Come on,
Say
slides.
it again, what? I didn't hear what you just said.
Oh, I said the only reason why that video survived is because they shipped that film off to the main office. I think it was a newspaper or a journal.
Oh,
Commissioned it,
okay.
and they shipped it off, and so they found the film actually in New York. Otherwise, we may not have had that film at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was being sent to Yeah, to run as an interest thing at like vaudeville performances and things like that. They thought that was very, it was very novel having them, ride on the front of a trolley and film the street scene. And this picture here is also Market Street. So that was Market Street in the video, and this is what Market Street looked like afterwards. Also, big news of the decade, 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright were successful in flying their airplane in Kitty Hawk. So it shows what a big transition period this is. You've got trains, you've got airplanes started, you've got cars started. There's a lot of invention happening. Local news, one of our big stories here locally during the decade was the 1908 Democratic National Convention. Took place the summer of 1908 in July. It was the first time a convention of a major political party had been held in a Western state. They unanimously declared William Jennings Bryan as their candidate for office. Of course, he lost. He lost to Taft. But Denver wanted to put itself on the map. This was their newly built convention hall, and the press and the delegates admired it for its big, spacious interior. The way it was built, it kept them cool inside. It didn't heat up even with the 12,000 people that could be seated there. It was built at that time for $550,000. That the Denver Post has an article 24 hours before the convention was going to start, and in it they noted it's almost impossible to get a telephone connection within 20 minutes. The food supply ran out at 9 o'clock this morning. All this afternoon they have been diluting coffee and handling dried peaches to people who had been hoping for cantaloupe or grapefruit. So yeah, it was not necessarily the best planning, but yeah, it was a very big deal. And this picture here on the right is inside, and you can see how they were packed in there. And this is the Welcome Arch. The Denver government had this built to greet the delegates as they emerged from Union Station. It was bronze-coated steel illuminated by hundreds of lights, and it stood there at the foot of 17th Street for 23 years. It was finally torn down in 1931. I couldn't figure out why it was torn down, but I just thought that was really quite beautiful. So it was a world in motion. As you saw from that video, there were cars, there were horse-drawn things, there were bicycles, there were trolleys, and Oldsmobile was, they can be credited with the development of the assembly line. People usually think it was Ford, but it wasn't. It was Oldsmobile. His name was Ransom Olds, and Ford really got it going as far as really mass production, and he got it a reliability and a speed out of it that Oldsmobile didn't. But this is the Oldsmobile curved dash was what it's called, and you can tell from how the front of it curves up like that, and you can see, I mean, at this point it still looks like a horse-drawn buggy just without the horse. And so this would have been running around Denver, the first, because this was started running in production in 1901. So you would have seen these. That was, the cars were, all the cars were less than reliable, really. There's even a line in a song from the decade that he was trying to take his girl for a ride, and he kept having to get out and get under his car to keep it working. So, and then so that was over and over through the song. It repeats, and he had to get out and get under, get out and get under. But the Model T was introduced in 1908, and compared to the scarce, expensive, and often reliable cars that came before it, the Model Ts were plentiful, cheaper, and just tremendously reliable. In a matter of days after its initial release, 15,000 orders were placed for Model Ts. So we would have had that. And of course, this is our own. This is the Denver trolley. And like I said, it would have looked very much like that street scene from San Francisco, with people all over the street, coming in front and out. A little bit of chaos. There wasn't really an organized circulation of traffic for actually still quite some time. And this is how women would have looked during the decade. So fashion in the early part of the decade still had a strong influence of the previous century. So it had been the Victorian era, and you could still see that quite a bit. The dress on the left, you can still see a lot of Victorian influence. So that really what they considered 1900 to 1910 Edwardian. As the decade progressed, fashions began to soften, dresses came up a little bit. So when Edward VII came to the throne, the woman's dress was kind of a pyramid shape. You had a wide skirt on the bottom, and it went kind of narrower to a smaller hat up on top. By 1910, it was almost the opposite. The skirts had narrowed. The skirts had narrowed, the silhouette was straighter, and they wore enormous hats. So it was like an inverted pyramid. In fact, over time, the skirts not even just came straight, they started to tuck them in a little bit at the bottom to give it almost a more pulled in, to accent the feet. And so ladies would wear very fashionable boots very often. Also, we're at the start of the decade, they had the hourglass corset that was still pretty Victorian. And then they the Gibson girl corset, which tilted the hips so your butt sort of stuck out and your chest moved forward. That had already been introduced previous to 1900, but it kind of swept the country. So you get a lot of these women in this very forward tilted position, and they thought that that was healthier because it didn't put all the pressure on your abdomen that the hourglass corset had. But then as the years went along with women wearing this, they realized that it was doing a lot of damage to women's spines. And then in 1908, a Frenchman named Paul Poiret introduced a dress without a corset. And women abandoned those corsets as fast as they could towards the end of the decade, going for a straighter, more natural figure and a little bit higher waistline. And you can see a little bit of the idea, the really large hats, more natural silhouette. You get the curvy heels, and this is an Edwardian couple here on the right, big hats. It was funny, I also found there was, big hats were such a thing that there was actually a movie short released during the decade, silent movie about women's hats, where there was the movie had people watching a movie. So you were watching a movie of people watching a movie, but in it, women kept coming in and sitting down, and the men couldn't see because the hats were so big. And it's very cute. Men's fashion. This is where men really moved toward what we would consider to be a modern style. Pants got a little more comfortable and straight. Though coattails were still worn during the evenings or for special events, there was a big shift to a more casual look for men, and especially in their hats. They would still have top hats for evening, but felted derbies and boulders became standard for the well-dressed men of the 1910s, and they were way more comfortable than the silk hat top hats of previous decades. And here we're going into food. This is the dawn of the modern recipe, which I thought was a fascinating thing. They have ingredients. This recipe here is brownies, and it's the first brownie recipe that we would recognize as a brownie in a widely distributed cookbook. I think I read that somebody found one in like a local cookbook in Maine from a few years before, but this recipe is from the Fanny Farmer cookbook that was released in 1906. And it's the first time that there's brownies. And she has notice a list of ingredients with step-by-step kind of instructions. Fanny Farmer was a suffragette and a cooking teacher. And it was one of her passions was food safety, and her cookbook, the goal behind it was to help women have a better experience in doing the cooking that they did on a daily basis. Other foods that came in the this was there were still a lot of cooking being done, but it was also the dawn of the modern era of restaurant eating. Patronage at restaurants, they figure, grew by about faster than the population was increasing, and the number of restaurant keepers swelled by 75% over the course of the decade. Now, Coca-Cola, this is Dr. Pepper. Coca-Cola had been being sold as a syrup that they would make that was sold only to like soda fountains. And you could go to a soda fountain and get a Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola started you were able to buy a Coca-Cola in a bottle for the first time in 1899. So right at the start of the decade. So that would have come in for the people who lived here. Dr. Pepper also started life as a syrup served at soda fountains. It was created by a young pharmacist. The story goes that the taste of Dr. Pepper was inspired by the smell of the medicines in the pharmacy, which I didn't think that was probably the best inspiration, but the pharmacist kind of lost interest. He started it in the 1880s, and it was a local thing, local to Waco, Texas. But he passed it along to some colleagues, and because he had lost interest. And it was at the St. Louis World's Fair that they were able to get the drink out to the general public. And Dr. Pepper took off from there. It became a national favorite following that. This recipe to the right, eggs in prison, was a dish that was, actually, this was not in the Fanny Farmer. This was in a cookbook that came out after hers, and you can see again that they've started doing not as well as she did. They do have cups on the meat, but the stale breadcrumbs, you just sort of, it's a lot more nebulous as to how much you're supposed to be using. Seasoning and flavorings to suit. But that particular recipe it was in cookbooks in the 1900s, it actually gained a lot of popularity in the Depression of the 1930s, because it was a good way to deal with, to use up whatever you had on hand. And if you didn't have much meat, you could use, you mixed more of the breadcrumbs in. It was a way to make things go a lot farther. Other things that came out in this time period, including in 1902, Jell-O. It was declared America's favorite dessert in 1904. This is the Rocky Mountain Cookbook. So on the left is a page from the cookbook, and you can see this. It's about half and half. Some of the recipes have the ingredients measured out, and some of them are the old style, just a paragraph telling you how to do it. This cookbook is interesting because it was published in 1903 specifically for high altitude cooking. So this woman, Carolyn Trask Norton, came to Colorado, realized that anybody who moved here could have a lot of trouble cooking because of the altitude. And she developed this cookbook. That picture to the right is actually my cookbook, because they have decided that this book is an important book for the history, our country's history. So you can buy that cookbook now, currently. I got mine at Target. It's they reprinted it, and so you can have your own little piece of history to try these old recipes that they would have been using at the time. So let's go on to some music. This is Billy Murray. He was known as the Denver Nightingale. Most people don't know Billy Murray, but you would know his songs. He was a huge star in the decade, and a lot of the songs that he sang are still with us. He was the person who sang "Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis." We all associate it with Judy Garland, but it was actually Billy Murray's song that then they used in the movie. He sang Yankee Doodle Boy. He sang In My Merry Oldsmobile. He sang, see, in fact, let me get some dates on those. Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis, 1904. Yankee Doodle Boy, 1905. Give My Regards to Broadway, 1905. In My Merry Oldsmobile, 1905. Grand Old Flag, 1906. Shine On Harvest Moon, 1909. By the Light of the Silvery Moon, 1910. He was the huge star of the day. Now, he was not actually born in Denver. He was born in Philadelphia, but his family moved to Denver when he was little and he was raised here. They moved to Denver in 1883. He started singing early. He was recognized as a vocalist who could deal with the you had to, at the time, there was no microphones. So a singer had to be able to basically yell tunefully, because you yelled into the big cones, and it was actually the force of your voice that carved it into the wax, which then they could make additional copies from. So they had to be able to enunciate, and they had to be able to project, and and all of that while still making it sound like you were singing and not hollering. But yeah, he was the big musician, big singer of the day. Books of the day. Turns out there is a lot of the books that we know that are from this decade.
I
So
love the covers.
yeah, aren't the covers beautiful?
Yeah.
Yeah, and these are not unusual. A lot of the covers, if you look up these original books from 1900 to 1910, have really gorgeous covers. Besides these three, other ones that you'd probably know, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm was 1903. Oh, so Wonderful Wizard of Oz was 1900. Hound of the Baskervilles was 1901. Call of the Wild is 1903. There was also Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm in 1903, Anne of Green Gables in 1908, Wind in the Willows in 1908, Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter in 1901, and The Scarlet Pimpernel, which I love The Scarlet Pimpernel, in 1905. Then there's a lot more, but I just thought it's amazing how many, for over 100 years ago, how many of these amazing classics came from this small time period. Now we're going to talk about theaters and movies. So this is, these three theaters, unfortunately, were, all of them are not with us anymore. The one to the left is the Orpheum, opened in 1903. The middle one is the Empress, opened in 1907. And the one to the right is the Victory, which opened in 1910. And so people would have gone down to see actual silent movies, but also vaudeville and singing performances and plays. And there was a lot of options for them to go and have entertainment. It's one of the things that struck me as I was going through all this stuff is how many things we do today that they were doing too.
Mhm.
It's there's a lot of connection here, and a lot more connection than there would have been even 10 years earlier. And I was really surprised by all of that. Now, all three of these theaters are gone. The left one and the middle one are now both parking lots. And the right one is the US Bank Tower is on that location. So that's all kind of sad, but
Mhm.
we still have Elitch Gardens Theater.
Oh,
And that they have been restoring, and it's got its certificate for capacity now. I'm not sure if they ended up doing, they were going to try and open it up in 2021 after all this restoration. But of course, that was the plans in 2020 before, you know, everything happened. So I'm not sure whether they have actually got it up and running yet to see things, but it has been restored. It was built in 1891. So people of the 1900 to 1910 would have been going here to see performances. And it's someplace we can still go today, which I thought was really awesome. And then finally, the birth of the movies. So this fella here is George Méliès. He was born in Paris in 1861. He started out as a magician, and then he fell in love with filmmaking. And he set up his own studio, and he did a lot of special effects movies that inspired all kinds of people. That picture there with the rocket ship in the moon's face is A Trip to the Moon. That that's his best known work in 1902. Then that one, a group of astronomers embark on a space voyage where they encounter lunar folk and are taken prisoners. He made movies, basically just straddles this decade. He started making movies in 1896 and he made movies till 1913. He made about 500 films over these, you know, not quite 20 years. He pioneered many special effects techniques. He did stop motion, slow motion, dissolving from one scene to another, double exposure, split screens. He did vanishing tricks. He did things that just floored and amazed people at the time. And so he was a pioneer of movie making, and 1900 to 1910 was his heyday. Other movies of the time, the one on the left here is A Christmas Carol. You can see the Ghost of Christmas Present. They did it in a double exposure. So the Ghost of Christmas Present is floating and slightly transparent, as Scrooge is talking. Now this movie is only like 10 minutes long, you know, short films, and it's a silent because the sound didn't come in till the 20s. But by all accounts, that I've heard that the acting is actually super good in that one. That was the first Frankenstein adaptation was in 1910. There was the first adaptation of Alice in Wonderland was in 1903 by Cecil M. Hepworth, which I thought was a great name. It was 10 minutes long too, and it had special effects in it as well, like Alice grows and she shrinks. And then the very first, what people consider the first fully animated cartoon movie is that Phantasmagoria that I have in the corner there. And to finish this off, I'm going to go over and I'm going to show you a bit of Phantasmagoria, which, let's see, I put that over here so I could get at it. Oh, here it is. Right, full screen. They put this card on for a very long time, so we don't need to sit there and watch the whole thing. So that, I just thought that was very clever, how the hand there, who would have thought that this is 1908? And again, this is another one where they talk about the women's really big hats. It must have been a really common joke at the time. And it's just, there's not a lot of, it's not like there's a lot of story, it's a lot of stream of consciousness, but I thought it was actually really super clever for 1908. And that's all of it. But I just thought that was
Oh, that's cute. That's clever.
really, really cute. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, let's
Ringing.
like to zoom. So that was what I had found out. Oops. For a second, my screen blanked out on me. Can you hear me still?
Yes, you
Okay.
can.
So yeah, that was what I had found out about 1900 to 1910.
Amazing, Catherine, or Carolyn, that was amazing. And I can't believe you pulled it together that quickly. Thank you. I just want to open it up. Do you guys have any questions or comments?
I lived in Wash Park. My house was one from the corner at Louisiana and University. And we were told that the house was built in 1904 and that we had the oldest apple tree, in the area. But what I remember was they had a garage, but nobody's car would fit in it.
Yes.
So I guess it would have been one of the ones like we just saw.
For those
that
tiny little cars. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have one of those, Carolyn? Garage?
I have a little bitty garage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, yeah, we, if, as long as we have a compact.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing else in there, it'll just fit.
So I had a question about the Democratic Convention building. Is that still standing?
You know,
Where was that?
don't-
17th and
So that was, where was that? It was, yeah, I think it was 70. It was called the, what they call it, it was just the convention hall.
Yeah.
And
do you have an address there? I didn't write it
Let-
down.
let me see if I can find an address.
Because I think I've seen the when you talked about the theaters and how the Victory Theater that became the Princess Theater and then closed in 1940 and it's now the US Bank Tower.
Yeah,
I think it's right there. It's right there on Curtis Street between 16th Street Mall and the Denver DCPA, right? Isn't that where it is?
so let's see.
The Denver
Uh,
Center of Performing Arts, because it's at 1660 Curtis Street. Well, I'm gonna look for it next time I go downtown for a ballet or play or something.
Okay,
What's
so
this?
the convention center was at 14th and Champa. Is where the
14th
convention.
Champa. Okay. I'll look for that, see if it's still there. But that theater is still there at 1660 Curtis Street, because it said the article you had up there, you said it's now the US Bank Tower.
Mhm.
So it just has the original ornate, theater front, I guess. And then they built a tower on top of it.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm gonna check it out next time.
I'm gonna check, I need to check it out too.
Field trip.
Yeah, field trip. Yeah, it's always the ones that you read and it says that it's now a parking lot. Those are the ones that are particularly depressing.
Yeah.
Oh,
But now I
Like when
need to go to go to the Elitch Garden Theater. Now that I realize that they've got it going again. I think that is
That's
gonna be,
wonderful that they did that. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Anyone who's lived in Denver, I mean, who's older than us, has a story about the Elitches, going dancing there or something, and all the beautiful landscaping.
yeah, because
you were talking
I'm
about,
new to the area.
I'm
A lot of this is all new to me because I'm new to the area. So, so much of this has been not just a history learning experience, but an area learning experience.
right. So what are they showing now at that Elitch's Gardens Theater? What are they showing there now? Do you know? Or
So when I looked at it, there wasn't anything on the schedule when I looked at it. It might only be a summer thing. I
yeah.
know that in 2020, that is when they started their third stage of restoration. And they were planning on being able to have things going in 2021. But I don't know if they actually did with all the pandemic delays, who knows? But I was just mighty tickled to see that it got restored.
Yeah.
you were talking earlier too, when you were showing the St. Louis World's Fair. If you ever study anything about Rudolph Diesel, he came to that state fair, and part of his presentation was to get money for his project, which was the steam engine, working. And his second cousin came from Illinois over to visit him. And that second cousin is my great, 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 great grandfather, Andre Diesel.
That's neat.
It's fun to see these. And when we study, what's going on, how our family connected with that too.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Well, Carolyn, thanks so much. It was really good.
I
Thank you.
enjoyed that.
Thank you,
glad.
Carolyn.
So when did you move into your 1904 house?
Fall of 2019.
Oh, okay. So you've just been there.
So
Years,
when
3
the world shut down, we had boxes all over the house.
You had projects.
Yeah, projects.
And like I was saying earlier, this history club gave a lot of us who didn't get a chance to experience Denver and had just moved here a way to experience it, fall in love with it, and learn about the city when we couldn't leave our house. So it was
Right.
nice.
Now, have you done many of these, Carolyn? Because I heard Tina saying she hadn't heard about them either. Have you done a lot of these?
Well, I've done, Brittany has done a lot. I've done a few. I did one on bringing the railroad to Denver. I
Hmm.
did one on researching the history of your house.
The census.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
does Sharon send out an email on all these? Cause
This
I
is
guess,
actually, this was the first time that I thought, oh, I bet the DAR ladies would be interested in this. So,
oh, okay.
so this was the first time I emailed Barb and I said, do you think people would be interested? And she said, yes, email Sharon. So,
Well, good. Thanks for thinking of us and including us this
Yeah,
time.
thanks so much. I got to put my cats to bed. I'll see everybody next week.
Bye,
Bye.
Forrest.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.